Anyone?
You're ready to go?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first Northwest Authors Reader event for 22-23 season. We're pleased to welcome Eileen Garvin here. Before we start, I'd like to do a commercial for the Cola Creek Lodge for hosting Eileen, because Rance told me to do this. Eileen was born and raised in Eastern Washington, more specifically, Spokane. She presently lives in Hood River, Oregon. Her debut novel, The Music of Bees, here, is a national bestseller. It was named a Good Morning America Buzz Pick. Nice pun. A Good Housekeeping Book Club pick, a People Magazine Best New Book, an Indie Next pick, a Library Reads pick, a Christian Science Monitor pick, and named a Most Anticipated Book of 2021 by several websites and magazines. By the way, copies of Music of Bees are available both at Cannon Beach Books and Beach Books in Seaside. Eileen's memoir, How to Be a Sister, was named an Indie Next by IndieBound and was chosen as a Target Book of the Month and a Kindle Book of the Month. Her essays have appeared with Medium, The Oregonian, PsychologyToday.com, and Creative Nonfiction Magazine. Eileen and her husband share their home with a fearless calico cat, a passionate Baja mutt, 4 chickens, and about 60,000 honeybees. Let's welcome Eileen Garvin.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here this afternoon to talk with you about The Music of Bees, and such a pleasure to be here in person. I have had more virtual events than live events since the book came out, and it's really lovely to see people's faces. Also, I understand we're doing a hybrid event, so this is kind of cool. We get to do both. And Zoom has been such a boon to my industry in this way for people who can't or don't want to travel. It's a lovely option to have. So thank you for being here today. Let's see. This afternoon, I thought I would tell you a little bit about how I got my start as a writer, and a bit about honeybees, which feature broadly in the story, as you might imagine, and then a bit about how this book came to be. And I have a couple of short sections to read as well. And I think we have a Q&A at the end. Yeah, so my love of my writing life really began with a love of reading. I was born and raised, as Doug said, in Spokane. I was the youngest of 5 children, and as such, I was an early reader because I had lots of older siblings. And reading was a very much a sanctioned activity in our household. I got my first library card at the South Hill branch of the Spokane Public Library, and pretty much immediately my first library finds. Just wanted to put that out there. And I love, there was this wonderful bookstore called the Children's Corner Bookshop when I lived in Spokane that I haunted that place, and later Auntie's, which is a wonderful independent there. I went to Cataldo Primary, and because it was such a small school, by the time I was in 6th grade, they just put me in my own reading group. They're like, this kid is, just go over there, go in the corner and read whatever you want. And that was really just heaven for me. And then after that, I went to Gonzaga Prep, which is a Jesuit high school, and loved my AP English classes there. And whenever I think about my early life as a writer, which which began in Spokane, or rather my early life as a reader, I always have these kind of pangs of regret about some of my literary transgressions of my childhood. So if I had the chance, which I haven't yet, I'd like to apologize to the South Hill branch of the Spokane Public Library for stealing a smutty book in 1980 from the adult section. But I had a lot of questions, and I was a shy Catholic kid, and I didn't know who to ask. So, and also I knew they wouldn't let me check it out because it was an adult book, and also because my library fines were so astronomical. So I stole it, and someone asked me what happened to that. My mom found it, and my mom is she's gonna. This is live. She's gonna kill me if she sees this, because she absolutely reveres books, but she threw it away because she thought it was so bad. Anyway,
what was the name of it?
it was Forever by Judy Blume.
Everybody read that?
Not so bad, but I was little. Also, in the seventh grade, I borrowed Watership Down from my seventh grade teacher, Mr. Bruce Goebel. And I finally did get around to reading it during the pandemic. And it was as good as he said it would be. But it did have a lot of more violence than I thought it would, and had some kind of troubling gender politics that I don't know if I'll ever get to talk to Mr. Goebel about, but I did enjoy the book. And lastly, I always remember that I failed to memorize Sea Fever by British poet laureate John Masefield for Father Lantry's AP English class my freshman year. I crammed it into my short-term memory, but I still got hung up on the last two lines of the second stanza, which is a doozy. Does anybody know this poem, Sea Fever? And all I ask is a windy day with the white clouds flying, and the flung spray and the blown spume and the seagulls crying. I mean, that's hard. That's hard for a 14-year-old. But I've learned to live with myself for these transgressions. So when it was time for me to go to college, I wasn't really clear about what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to set myself apart from old, two of whom had gone to Gonzaga University, which is a small Jesuit college where they studied the humanities. And I wanted to do something different, so set myself apart. So I ended up at Seattle University, which is a small Jesuit college where I studied the humanities. So, I had some ideas, but not a lot of follow through. But I loved my English classes. I graduated with an English major and a philosophy minor, and I adored school. Many of my professors during college were fond of saying, you can do anything with an English degree. And that is not true, as it turns out. Any English majors in here? Yes. Okay. So we know this is a lie. It's a bald-faced lie. You can't do much with an English degree except go back to school. But I tried. And if you looked at my resume from my 20s, that section at the top, the summary position, would have said, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. But when I look back, I realized that I was sort of finding my way from one writing adjacent job to the next, things that kind of circled around, because I was never brave enough to think I could actually be a writer. I did things like I worked at the Writing Center. I was a private tutor for high school students. I taught English as a second language in American Samoa and then in Spain. And I worked in marketing for small presses and a self-publishing company. And I had far more interesting jobs from this time that I think have been more helpful in my actual writing life, including movie theater usher and popcorn seller at the Egyptian Theater, barista, busser, host, dishwasher, and meat grinder cleaner at various restaurants in Spokane, Seattle areas. I worked at a rubber stamp making factory, which I did all kinds of things there. I was a podiatry assistant for a very short period of time one summer, and I was a singing, dancing cocktail waitress on a dinner boat. So none of these jobs, writing adjacent or otherwise, felt quite right. Although I think I would have made a good podiatrist if I'd stuck with that. But I went back to school instead. And at University of New Mexico, I got my master's degree and had a year off in between that and my PhD program. And as I was telling Doug earlier, I accidentally got a job at a newspaper, and I just fell in love with that industry. I was hooked on the process of coming up with a story idea, interviewing people, putting it all together, taking this mess of ideas and making some form out of it, and then starting all over again the next week. It was a weekly paper. And so I abandoned my doctoral program and I never looked back. And so after a few years at that paper, I moved to Oregon. And Albuquerque was a town at that time of about 500,000 people. There was a university. There were many newspapers and magazines that I could have worked for. And instead I moved to Hood River, Oregon, population 7,000, where I knew nobody. I didn't know a single person. I was a trailing spouse, as they say, and not a lot of opportunities. which doesn't seem like the best career move, but things have worked out okay. What I ended up doing, as you might imagine, is freelancing. And at the time, I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm going to freelance. Like that sounds really kind of exotic and fancy. What that really means is underemployed. So I worked for freelance for the Oregonian and local newspapers and anybody really who would hire me. But I had a lot of time, and I don't have kids, so I had even more free time in my 30s and early 40s. And I was also, I spent a lot of time in the gorge. I imagine many of you have been there. It's this beautiful place with lovely trails and forests like you have here. And I had time to really just think about things. And that's when these story ideas started coming to me, my own story ideas. And that's when I wrote and published How to Be a Sister, which is about growing up with my sister Margaret, who has very severe autism, and then the journey to reconnect with her as an adult after I'd moved back to Hood River, as a matter of fact. And that was a wonderful experience, and it was even more fun than the process of being a newspaper reporter, because it was a bigger mess, more stories and more opportunity to try and put material into a shape. And I feel really grateful that this book has stayed in print all this time. It just got its fourth printing, and we just released the audiobook last week, actually, which was kind of late in coming, but really, really fun. And I got to record that, so that was really delightful. What am I talking about? Oh, okay. So I'm talking about my circuitous route to this career. As you can see, I sort of bumbled my way from one thing to the next. And I like people to hear this story, because writing, when I finally landed on it, has been such a joy for me. But there's no one way to get there. You don't have to take creative writing classes. You don't have to get an MFA. You don't have to start when you're 20. You can really just embrace this wonderful thing for what it is, whenever you feel moved. So I like people to hear that story of bumbling around until I landed in the right place. So eventually, I got a full-time job out of that freelancing. I mentioned writing travel and tourism copy for Travel Oregon took my time for a few years, and that was so fun. I got to travel all over the state, and I would, at least once a year, we drove from Astoria to Brookings, just the whole coast, and that was really a favorite part of my year. But I found myself during that time really wanting that free time that I'd had when I first moved to Hood River to write my own stories. And so in 2016, I went back to freelancing and underemployment with better connections this time, so it was a little more sustainable. And almost immediately got the idea for this book. And for those of you who haven't read it, The Music of Bees tells the stories of three lonely strangers who meet by chance on a beekeeping farm in my fictionalized version of Hood River, Oregon. There's Alice Holtzman, who's 44. She's working a dead-end job at the county and grieving the unexpected loss of her husband. And she meets Jacob Stevenson, who's 18 and has the tallest mohawk in the history of Hood River Valley High School. But he is facing very changed circumstances following an accident at a high school party. He was born able-bodied, and now he's using a wheelchair. And the third member of this unlikely trio is Harry Stokes, who is a 24-year-old drifter trying to find a new life after a stint in jail. And the three of them unite over the honeybees when a pesticide company threatens the health of the honeybees in Hood River County. So as you might imagine, the book contains a lot of information about beekeeping, which came from my own experience. I'm not Alice. I only have 3 hives. I don't have a big growing desire to run an apiary, but I really am fascinated with honeybees. And the way that transpired was an accident. So raise your hand if you could tell the difference between a honeybee, a bumblebee, and a yellow jacket. Right. Okay. So that's kind of all I knew about bees before this started. And I was also sort of afraid of bees. I'm an English major after all, not a biology major. But a friend of mine got a hive with a plexiglass window, observation window, And you could just sit there and watch them. And I imagine some of you have seen these before. And it was just mesmerizing to see them going about their business, not flying around. Now I know better. Honeybees don't want to sting you because they die after they sting you. But it was so fascinating to watch them work. And I thought, okay, well, I want to get a hive. And so for better or for worse, it's really easy to get into beekeeping. And I got the hive in the mail and I ordered some bees and I was off and running. And I made a lot of mistakes that first couple of seasons, but have really learned a lot. More recently, thanks to the Oregon State University Master Beekeeper Extension Service program. I just got my certificate as an apprentice, which took 2 years thanks to the end the pandemic. But here's a little bit about the hive, just to give you a gist. A typical hive has 60,000 honeybees, and most of the hives that we use in America look like office file boxes, and they're called Langstroth hives. There's about 60,000 bees in a healthy hive, and there's one queen who is the mother to all those bees in there. Her only job is to lay eggs. And she on peak season, she will lay up to 3,000 eggs per day to keep things going. She doesn't do anything else. She depends on her daughters to feed her, clean her, bring her water, and protect the hive. And a very small percentage of those 60,000 bees are drones. They're males, and their only job is to fly out of the hive to the drone congregating area, which I always thought sounded like some shady corner of the park, and mate with queens from other hives to keep the genetic diversity afoot. And so most of the 60,000 bees are female. They're female worker bees. They're the daughters of the queen, and they do everything. They clean up, they store pollen and nectar, they take care of the babies, they guard the front door, and they forage out in the field. They're kind of the Cinderellas of the bee world. And a worker lives approximately 6 weeks, and in her lifetime is responsible for about a teaspoon of honey. So that just kind of blew my mind the first time I read that. Just think about that. Next time you go to spoon some into your tea, like how much labor goes into that delightful bit of sweetness. Along the way, I also learned that, of course, we love honeybees because we love honey, but there are actually about 20,000 species of bees in the world, 4,000 native species in North America, and Oregon has about 500 native species. And so when you hear that sentence thrown around that bees pollinate about 30% of the world's food supply, that's all pollinators. It's not just the honeybee. And all the problems that honeybees have or many of them are also affecting all those other pollinators. The Western honeybee that we love so much is actually not native to North America. It's from Africa and the Middle East. It moved its way north to Europe, and German orchardists brought those bees over to America for the first time in the 17th century, which I love because there's always been this connection between the fruit and the honeybees. And I write about the apple and pear orchards of Hood River Valley in this story. So I was really, and I wrote that before I realized that, wow, we've been doing this for hundreds of years between farmers and bees. The first people have been collecting honey for as long as people have been around, but humans have been beekeeping at least as long ago as 2600 BC. There's evidence of beekeeping in Egypt from that long ago. They're actual, I don't know what they called them. Well, the skeps and these, but it's noted in some of their hieroglyphics that the royal beekeeper, and there was honey found in King Tut's tomb, still edible, which is kind of crazy. So how does this all come together? My writing, my beekeeping, and then this book. And as I mentioned, I'm not a fiction. I don't have an MFA. I hadn't taken any writing classes, and my background is really in what you can generally call creative nonfiction. So reporting, travel features, personal essay. What they have in common is that they're all taken from real life. You have facts, you can interview people, you can look up data, and then kind of figure out what to put together. So this was completely new, and it literally came out of nowhere. And 2016, as I mentioned, I just quit my full-time job. I was back to freelancing, and I was driving to a farm in the Hood River Valley to pick up a new nucleus of bees. And it was one of those beautiful Oregon spring dusks. The orchards were in bloom, and the wind was blowing everything around. And I was kind of spacing out driving, as you do. And I was passed when I in this back kind of country back road, I was passed by this guy going the other direction, and I noticed that he was in a wheelchair and that he had this tremendous mohawk. And Hood River is not a town in which you see either of those things very much. It's a small town, and so I noticed him. And as we passed each other, I had this experience that I'd had as a reporter, where I get a sentence kind of just delivered to my head. And the sentence was, Jacob Stevenson had the tallest mohawk in the history of Hood River Valley High School, and which became the opening sentence to this book. And I knew from experience that if I didn't write it down, it would go away, because I'm probably that's happened to many of you here as well. You think, oh, I'll remember that, but you don't. So I just pulled over, I scribbled it down, I went on with my errand, and I went home. And the next morning I got up and I sat down and I typed this into the computer and thought, let's see where this goes. And magically, happily, this story emerged from there. Jacob first, and then Alice, and then Harry, and it became something. And I think about that a lot, the accident of that, the accidents in life that happened, because if I'd been 15 minutes earlier or hadn't gone to pick up those bees, I would never have seen that person, had that inspiration. I don't know who he is. I have some leads. That's another story. But anyway, that's how this came to be. And so I want to read a little bit from the book to give you kind of the flavor of it. This first section I like to read is from chapter 5. And what I like about it is it's the first time that Alice and Jake meet each other. It's early in the book. And to set the stage, what's happened is Alice is on her way home from Portland. She's not in a great mood. She is upset and nearly wrecks her car, swerving to avoid Jake. And so she's hit a fence post, and all her bees that she had in the back of her truck went flying. So, and where I situated them, for those of you who are familiar with Hood River, it's kind of out, you're heading towards the Fruit Loop. And that's actually where I was in that moment, that evening that I just described to you. And Jacob, for his part, is having a really bad day himself, because it's nearing the anniversary of his accident, and he's really frustrated. He doesn't know how to move forward in his life, and he's kind of stuck at his parents' house, and things aren't going very well. So what I love about this is that we know more about them than they know about each other, and this is the first time they meet each other. So they're waiting for the bees to calm down, and then Alice is going to give Jake a ride home because it's dark now. She looked at the side of his thin face. What were you supposed to do when someone hit their head? Ask them questions? Jake, he said his name was Jake. How's your head, Jake? Any better? He touched a hand to his bald pate and nodded. Do you know where you are? What were you doing out here? He smiled at that. Don't worry, I don't have a concussion. I'm on Reed Road. It's April 10th, 2014. I live in Hood River, Oregon, and Barack Obama is president of the United States. His grin faded, and he frowned. But I can't remember your name. Alice Holtzman, she said. I'm fine, Mrs. Holtzman. Well, the kid did seem okay. She glanced at the truck. She'd have to deal with the mess to get the boy home. Listen, Jake, if you don't mind, I'm going to go check on my bees. Oh, yeah, no problem. You sure? Yeah, totally. You sit tight, she said, rising. Okay, I won't go running off, he said. She hesitated. Was that a joke? He waved a long arm. Really, I'm fine. Go check your bees, Mrs. Holtzman. Call me Alice, she said. My mom is Mrs. Holtzman. Okay, Alice, Jake said. Alice pulled on her gloves and veiled hat and flicked on a red flashlight, steeling herself for the damage. 7 nukes remained in the truck bed. She righted them and tamped down the lids. The other 5 were strewn alongside the road. She knew there would be lots of dead bees, but she had to focus on what she could salvage now. Sounds like a horror movie over there, the boy called. No, it's fine, Alice called back. I just need a few minutes to sort this out. You all right? Yep, he said. In about 20 minutes, she'd collected all the frames and put the nukes in some order. She was stung twice on her forearms. That couldn't be helped. She had to concentrate on the ones she could save. Alice returned to Jake, who was sitting up with his back against a rock. With that hair and his long legs, he looked like some sort of exotic bird. Alice reached down and grasped one side of the wheelchair, and the kid glared at her. She recoiled, embarrassed, and wondered how she'd offended him. I thought I'd have a look at your chair, she said. His face relaxed, and the boy nodded. Alice righted the wheelchair and ran her flashlight along the right side. She noticed scuffs, presumably from his fall. But when she spun the wheel, it seemed true, which was good. She could still hear the bees, but the buzz was receding. There must have still been hundreds flying in the air. The kid shifted against the rock and gazed past her. So they live in those boxes? Just temporarily, Alice said. They all have nice hives waiting for them at my house. Those boxes are for the commuter stage, like a cattle truck, she said, now surveying the left side of the chair, which seemed unmarred. How do you get them back in? Jake asked. Tiny cattle dogs, little lassos. She glanced at him and saw that he was smiling again. Funny kid, she thought. Well, they'll go back in as soon as it gets dark and cold enough out here, she said. I just need to give them a few minutes. Then I'll give you a ride home. No rush, he said. Look, I'd feel better if I called your folks, though, Jake, really. He sighed and pulled his phone out of his pocket. It's fine. I got it. He thumbed a message into his phone. Done, he said, and smiled. Thanks, she said. I don't want your parents to worry. I feel bad enough about all this. Alice tilted the chair to the right and spun the left wheel, which also moved freely and seemed true. She would insist on paying for any repairs. Did you tune up a wheelchair like a bicycle? She wondered. Well, technically, you didn't do anything. I fell over trying to get out of your way, so I'll just tell them you ran me off the road. Alice frowned, still looking at the chair, and didn't reply. Was he trying to be funny? I'm fine. Really, I was just... His voice trailed off, and he looked past her at the truck. Then he shifted slightly to face her. About the bees, Alice. Do you just wait until they get into those boxes? She nodded. Yep, they'll find their way back. They want to get home. What happens if they stay out after curfew? Does the mom bee lock the door? Alice set the chair aside, but didn't look at him. If they don't get home before the temperature drops, they just don't make it. What do you mean? Well, she said, if they don't make it back to the hive at night, then they die outside. It's too cold. She saw a look of concern cross his face, surprising her. She clicked off her flashlight. Most of them will be just fine. They're hardy, she said, wanting to reassure him. She was touched that a teenage boy might care about the fate of the small creatures. My dad always called them tough little broads, she said. He grinned at that and looked past her. So they can just go into any one of those boxes? He asked. You really want to know? He nodded. Alice looked up into the twilight at the small bee cloud buzzing over the truck. She loved the story of bees, which was like a fairy tale. Even if you were a scientist or a religious person, there was no denying that the bees had real magic. A hive of 60,000 honeybees, she explained, had one queen, leader and mother to them all. And 97% of the other tiny golden bodies buzzing away in there were her daughters. The remaining handful was made up of males called drones. Daughters and sons recognized the queen by her scent, which was called her pheromone. The queen pheromone said, all is well. It said, we are together. It said, you belong here. From the time they emerged from their capped cells, those golden creatures knew exactly what to do. The daughters were called worker bees, Alice explained to Jake as the light faded between them. The first thing they did after hatching, when they were known as callow bees, was clean up the cells they were born in. Then they started taking care of the other baby bees, feeding them and capping the larval cells, and helping the other newly emerging callow bees learn how to contribute to the hive. She told Jake how workers got promoted up the ladder as they got older, moving toward the front door to receive nectar and pollen from bees that flew around collecting in the field. Those were called foragers. Some workers eventually graduated to foraging or became guard bees, she explained. Guard bees kept watch at the entrance and only let in other bees that belonged there. How did they know? Jake asked. Who's who, I mean. They knew by the scent, Alice told him. As long as the queen was healthy and laying eggs, her pheromone kept them all united. If they had any worry, they would immediately stop what they were doing and expose the Nasanov gland in their abdomens, passing a distinctive lemony scent from bee to bee. The bees that foraged carried that smell with them and brought it back to the hive. The scent allowed the guard bees to identify them as residents and not robbers. What do you mean? They rob each other? She nodded. Bees from hungry hives will steal honey, so everyone gets checked at the front door. Yellow jackets try to get in too. They'll actually eat the larva and eggs, carnivorous little bastards. Whoops, she thought, language. She glanced at her watch. How long had they been sitting there? She felt anxious to get the boy home. The buzzing had died down, and few bees remained in the air. Almost done, as they're going to get anyway. Alice stood up, brushed off the seat of her overalls, and turned toward the truck. She didn't want the boy to see her face. It upset her to think about losing even one bee. She shivered, feeling the sudden drop in temperature that was common on April nights like this one. She turned to face Jake and the problem of getting him up, choosing, as she usually did, to be direct. Well, all right then, she said. Tell me how to help you get up, and I'll drive you home. So that's from chapter 5. That is Alice and Jake. And I'm also going to read a short bit here from chapter 3. I can remember where I put it. He's this stupid choices, and so he's spoiler alert, spent some time in jail. And he's from Long Island, and he's visiting a friend, and then he just doesn't really have a plan. So he ends up kind of washes up on the doorstep of his great uncle's trailer. And I've got that situated in the fictionalized, my fiction version of BZ Corner, which is north of the Columbia River, near kind of between Trout Lake and his uncle for a while, up there in the woods. And this will give you a sense of kind of where he is in his life. The trailer had seen better days. Among its failings, loose siding that banged in the wind and ragged insulation spilling out of cheap paneling. It had no running water, spotty electricity, and great holes in the floor. At night, Harry could hear mice skittering around behind the walls. At some point, the stairs had given way, so when Harry had arrived in February, the old man, who was nearing 90, was using a homemade ladder to climb in and out of the trailer. He seemed as unfazed to see his great-nephew walking up the muddy drive unannounced as he was to climb in and out of the trailer for twice daily trips to the outhouse. Uncle H hadn't questioned the young man's story about wanting to see the West. If he talked to Lydia about Harry's trouble, as his mother liked to put it, Uncle H didn't let on. Harry liked his uncle, who seemed content to hold up the conversation for both of them for hours on end. He talked about his years as a railroad engineer for BNSF, traveling from coast to coast, how he hitchhiked through every province in Canada as far as the remote territory of Newfoundland, facing the wild Labrador Sea. He regaled Harry with tales of the fine-looking women he'd met in his travels. He was a good listener. Perhaps that was why, after he'd been there for a week, his uncle didn't ask when he was leaving. Instead, Uncle H sent him to BZ for groceries and ice for the cooler, which he used because the refrigerator was broken. Harry procured the small supply of what Uncle H named staples: Jif, macaroni and cheese, Spam, potatoes, light beer, toilet paper, and Cheez-Its. After that, Harry did the shopping every 3 or 4 days. The two fell into an amicable routine. Uncle H enjoyed a captive audience for his stories and endless games of cribbage. Harry, stuck as he was between the recent debacle of his past and the uncertainty of his future, was happy to pause there, suspended between what he had done and what he might make of himself. As spring rains swept through the great woods, the two of them sat at the dinette in the mildewed trailer, playing cards or reading from Uncle H's library, which consisted of wildlife guides, Pacific Northwest history books, and a few ragged mysteries. Uncle H yanked gleefully on his shock of white hair whenever he beat his great-nephew at cards, which was often. In the afternoon, Uncle H curled up and napped. When the rain lightened, Harry poked around in the woods above the river. Once he had tried to tidy up around the trailer, sorting through the trash to see what might be salvageable or recyclable, but his uncle yelled at him to mind his own damn business and get his hands off his things. He stomped up the ladder with a ferocity that alarmed Harry, given his age and the integrity of the ladder, and slammed the flimsy door. Harry had spent the rest of the day down by the river. By the time he came back, Uncle H was frying up spam and potatoes for dinner. He waxed Harry at cribbage for the 100th time and didn't mention the incident. After that, Harry stuck to sanctioned chores like repairing the exterior of the trailer and reinforcing the ladder. Harry was handy with that sort of thing, and his uncle seemed to appreciate it. He'd also walk or hitchhike to the small grocery store. He stood with his thumb out, willing himself to look safe and friendly in his greasy pants and knit cap. People probably stopped faster for the old man pottering down the shoulder of Highway 101, he thought. The sight of Uncle H in his long johns worn under shorts and tube socks might have been the reason social services had shown up 2 days ago, or rather the not sight of him after Harry took over the shopping. Beasley was a small community. Somebody must have noticed that Uncle H hadn't made the trip for a while. Nobody would have recognized his great nephew shopping for him. Harry never spoke to anyone at the grocery store. Uncle H had no phone, so nobody could call to check on him. Harry had heard him grumble that his doctor nagged him to get a phone. So, although Uncle H might not have been surprised to see the county folks, Harry had been. When the white sedan and ambulance rolled slowly up the driveway 2 days ago, the old man was sleeping, as he had been doing more and more these days, and not just on rainy days. Harry was outside taking a leak, standing on the edge of the clearing where the woods began. A car emblazoned with Hood River County official use seal led the way. 2 women climbed out, a passenger in pink hospital scrubs and a driver in khaki pants and a navy cardigan. Harry saw a guy about his age climb out of the ambulance. The sedan driver said something to him and he nodded, leaned against the door of the ambulance and began thumbing through his phone. The 2 women walked toward the trailer. "Hello, Mr. Goodwin?" The driver pulled off her glasses as she approached the door. "Mr. Goodwin, are you home?" Harry felt an urge toward hospitality mixed with a sense of protectiveness. He moved to step into the sunlight and introduce himself as the great-nephew to and namesake of Harold Goodwin. He would ask these people who they were and what they needed. He would climb inside and help his uncle down the ladder, even though Uncle H got mad when Harry offered to help. But Harry didn't do any of that. Instead, he turned around and ran. He couldn't say how long he had sprinted the narrow game trail of the river. When he finally stopped, sweating, panting, he found himself deeper in the woods than he'd been before. He collapsed on the muddy dirt and tried to slow his hammering heart. He thought of his mother, exasperating, she would say, like when in first grade and unable to work the stiff button on his new jeans, Harry had wet himself at school. When he picked up, she asked, "Harry, why didn't you ask a teacher for help?" Harry just shrugged and wiped his nose on his sleeve. Exasperating, she had muttered for the first of 1,000 times. That's a little bit about Harry. So that's what I have for you. And I would love to take your questions about beekeeping, writing, Hood River, Oregon, or whatever you've got. Yes.
As you were reading, I was remembering I love this book, and I think one of the things that I loved about it was your characters were in terms of who they are. I mean, like Alice's brother-in-law or that nephew. Like,
I really don't. I wish I had a better answer than that, but it just seemed like along the way I would ask myself, without spoiling anything, I'll just say, so this Alice's brother-in-law, Ron, there's a rift in the family. What is that rift? What's plausible? How long would it have been since they've seen each other? What role might he have? So it had to make sense to me because I love drama in books and on TV. And when something is like good reader, it has to be believable. So, and you want the minor characters to be credible enough to support their position and yet not, they have to be believable. So you carry the reader forward without taking over the story. So I guess I just got lucky that you believed me that they worked. Yeah. Part is finding an agent. Book to explain the industry a little bit, if you're not familiar with it, to if you that she thought might be interested, and that process happened pretty quickly.
And did they edit it to your satisfaction?
Yes, I really loved the editor I worked with, and I think it really helped that I had been a reporter and also an editor for so many years, so that I feel comfortable with the collaboration process. At a certain point, I didn't feel like, oh no, don't change a word. I mean, you're never going to get anywhere like that. But by the same token, if an editor says don't change anything, it's perfect, then you want to run in the other direction. There's always room for improvement, and I really enjoyed working with my editor on the things she wanted to see emerge and just polishing things up. Little bits and pieces emerged out of that process that surprised me and were really fun. You don't always get lucky. Sometimes you have an editor that really wants you to change a lot of things, and then you have to make a decision: do I want to do this or not? So I got lucky with Lindsay Rose.
I have a question about your library. I'm thinking about all the books that are about to be banned or have been banned. That you're talking about. How do you feel about this discussion that's going on nationally?
But of course, as a reader and an English major, it's something that comes all the time, and I very much don't agree with it. I don't think that I think that people should have even Judy Blume, Mom, people have a right to read what's out there, and that's the wonderful thing about books and about libraries, that you have the opportunity to consider different kinds of stories, different point of views, because it's such an insight into how people think and how different kinds of people think, and a way to discover the world. I'm really not a fan at all of fan books.
It also answers a lot of questions that kids might have.
Yeah.
They don't know where to
Right.
go to find the answers.
Right. Then they don't have to steal Judy Blume books, because they could just go to the child-friendly, anatomy book. But there probably was one too. I just didn't look. Yeah. But thank you for asking that. Libraries do such important work in that regard for our communities, and I appreciate the work that we're lucky to have them, especially in small towns. We're really lucky to have our libraries.
Did you carefully plot it out in advance, or did it just kind of?
Yep. Yeah. Yes. It just happened, and I went back. Once I had a good draft, then I used an outline to see, okay, what happened when, and this doesn't work, this needs to get moved. I moved things around, but it just all came out in kind of one. I just kept following it, and I love listening to different authors talk about the way they work, and some people will start with an outline and really stick with that, and it's a wonderful guide. There are times I wish I had that, because you just sitting there, it's just you every day. No one cares if you're doing this. There's no one sitting there saying, good job, keep going, in your office. You're just sitting there by yourself. And there were days when I didn't know what happened next. And that was really, really, frustrating. So an outline would be fantastic, but I didn't have one. But I did love going back and using that outline as I have a kind of a checkered past as an English composition teacher as well. And I've always employed that go back, and I told my students, go back and look at what you've done. It's a way to kind of reevaluate your draft, what's there, because so often you think you know what's there, but it's actually, some of it's in your head, but you have to reevaluate what you've got and make yourself a little map.
Was that a different process when you wrote the memoir? But did you know what next you wanted to, in the memoir?
I didn't know what message I wanted from the memoir. What I started with was, I felt this compulsion to tell our wild family story. And so many of the stories on How to Be a Sister are stories that my family and I have retold over the kind of process. My sister is so interesting and unique, but we often found ourselves in really uncomfortable situations. And so all we could really do is laugh about it. So these stories are things we told over and over again. And I wanted to write them down as a younger person because I never felt like our story was represented. I felt like the story that people wanted to hear was, I was able to and it made me a better person, and everything started with topics. And if you look at the book, there are things like there's this chapter, one of my favorites, called "Let Her Eat Cake," which is about all the weddings we went to and the things that happened there. There's a dining out section that's just about some of the calamities of dining restaurants with my sister. There's special stories about friends and neighbors that made a difference in our lives. And but what was wrong with it, what wasn't working, that structure early on, is that I was trying to take this tack like, haha, isn't that funny? And I wasn't really being honest about how heartbreaking it could be. And it wasn't until I realized, oh, I need to set this in the present moment. And I just moved back, and I have to now figure out how this relationship is going to work. And once I found that narrative structure, then all those funny stories and their categories, then they fell into place. But it takes a while, and it really, there's no, you just have to keep working at it until it feels right.
When you were writing and developing your character, did you ever begin to identify with any one of them, or did you put yourself into the character?
Oh, I think probably me are present in all three of them. Yeah, this is obviously the most like me in terms of her age and demographic, but I mean, I found myself thinking about them all the time, which sounds like such a sort of annoyingly precious thing that writers say, but I'd be thinking about, we're going through and their hardships, and that helped just, again, try to make it more credible. Like, what would someone's response to this be? What would they be thinking? What would they be? How would they be a problem? And trying to remember what it was like to be an 18-year-old boy. It's been a while for me. So I think I tried to identify with all of them, even the minor characters. Yeah.
So did you write with it's often a writer gets up in the morning and goes to work. Did you write with that kind of discipline, or did you have like so many hours a day, whether anything was coming or not?
I did. Do you remember that part I told you about Catholic school? Yeah, so that I'm very good at that discipline, and I've continued to freelance, but I just decided early on that I write best in the morning, and that's what I would do. I would get up and I would run my creative stuff, and then my paying work would come after, and nobody had to know. So don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody any of my contract work that I work in the afternoon for them. I feel like anything you do, if you're, it's piano or you're a runner or whatever it is, it's just the training, and you have to do it all the time, because you do have days where you sit down and nothing happens, and you just have to keep showing up to make, just like some days you'll have a terrible run, you go a mile and everything hurts and you think this is awful, but then next day things feel better. It's like that. You have to have that consistency and well, I'm good at structure and self-discipline.
And guilt's a great.
Oh, I'm trying to get about that one. That doesn't seem to be getting me anywhere.
Fascinating article about artificial intelligence use in writing. And
Oh,
well, it sort of blew my mind because like the person who wrote the article, who is a writer, and who would sometimes have writer's block. She used this in order to figure out whether it was really usable. Right? And what she found out is, well, it is. And so much has been fed into it. And then you feed your own work into it. So it learns how you write. And she said that in the process of doing that, one, she stopped thinking about her characters, which you were describing as well. She stopped thinking about her characters, 24 hours a day. And she also found that when she would give some of these sort of half-finished, the finished sentences, the paragraphs, the pages to some of her friends who were her like editors, they really liked what the artificial intelligence because it's based on what have you read before. So I just wonder, someone like you who really relies on your creativity, even for nonfiction, creative nonfiction, whether you would, is this enticing at all to think in terms of, oh, well, it's another tool, potentially another tool that I could use for my writing?
no. I mean, I that's so interesting what you explained. I need to write more about this, but no, it's not. There are a lot of tools out there also that I'm not really a techie person, and there are so many that I know really help people. I can't even tell you what they are, but they're things that kind of give you a certain you write to a word count every day, or there's these programs that have prompts and all these apps and things, and I really don't. I don't want to do that. And I can see
Catholic upbringing.
because I love writing by hand. It just I mean less. I feel like I have too much technology in my life, and I have way less than most people. I just find that it's a hindrance to just being the human I want to be in the world, and so having to taking the most creative thing I do and having to use technology. I use my computer, my laptop, but that just feels like another layer of technology that I wouldn't want to engage with. And it also makes me feel kind of sad because I'm sure it will grow into that. So pretty soon we'll be watching films that have been, this machine has been fed every story in the world, and so it spits out the most interesting thing you've ever read. But there's something, I feel like there's something lost there in crunching creativity in the way that we crunch, the other things that are helpful, like when I'm wanting to get to Cannon Beach, I get lost, I use my maps, and so I appreciate technology. But I think I've answered your question, and I'm fascinated by that, but I don't think I would ever use that sort of thing. Yeah. Oh, yes. Go ahead.
I've asked several questions.
I picked up your book a week and a half ago because I was fascinated with the cover and the blue, so it spoke to me and I grabbed it.
I'll tell the marketing department that works.
Right?
Yes.
And I liked the title, and then I found out you were going to be here, so that was wonderful. I was very excited. And I had told at least 7 or 8 people that they had to read it before I knew you were going to be here. There's a lot I like about it. I like that it speaks to men and women. I like the fact that it's full of nature. and for me, speaking for me, God's creation. I've always been fascinated with a beehive, and to me, I see creation in it. I saw the theme of redemption and forgiveness and kindness and love and human beings connecting with each other. And the ability for all of us to remember to look beyond the cover of the book. You know, raising kids myself, and I can just, a personal example for me, never wanting my kids to have tattoos and having an adult son who's covered in tattoos. And learning to be okay with that is sort of like the Mohawk thing. My son has a reason for seeing the beauty in them. He's an artist, he's a musician. So you adapt to that, right? You look beyond the tattoo and you say, or the Mohawk, and you say to yourself, I'm going to learn how to understand what that means, because there was a reason for the Mohawk, right? And so you see someone on the side of the road figuring out how to get a ride or putting their thumb out, or whatever it is a human person is doing in their life, and you say to yourself, I'm going to learn how to not be judgmental. And we keep forgetting that over and over and over again in our lives. And you reminded us again that that's what life is about. And you kept surprising me all the way to the very end. There were things that you did that I kept thinking, oh, I hope she does this. I hope she does that. And you did all of it. With every one of the characters. And I just want to say thank you, because you kept reminding all of us what it is we want to do with each other, and you did it really well.
Well, thank you. That's so nice. You said so many nice things. I really appreciate that. Did my mother ask you to come? Sincerely, I appreciate that.
We've been through a lot in the last couple of years, and
Yeah.
you did a good job of reminding us what we're supposed to be doing with each other.
I appreciate you saying that. And I did not intend to write a happy story. I'll remind you, I started this in 2016, and I read dark fiction. I like Wally Lamb, Harry Helmy, The Bone People, Stones from the River. I mean, these are my books, and they're dark.
I like dark.
I do too.
I like
so.
dark, but you put the tough stuff in here.
I suppose I did. But
You
when
did.
I got to the end, I thought, happy story. Who knew? Like, sorry, spoiler alert. And I feel like I really appreciate Alice and Harry and Jake had that message that you just articulated so nicely about giving people a chance, about forgiveness, about seeing beyond what you think is in front of you. And so thank you very much for that.
Every single person in here struggled to get there, and I like the reality of it.
Yeah, we all
Thank you.
struggle. Thank you.
I think we're just about out of time. I'd like to remind us that our next Northwest author will be Cal Angus, who will be appearing here Saturday, October 15th. But I'd like to thank Eileen Garvin for coming and sharing with us.
Yeah.
I think
If we go across the street and get the book, are you staying long enough to sign it?